Hi, welcome to another episode of History Hunters. I've been waiting to come to this cemetery for years. Mount Moriah Cemetery in Kansas City. I'm here to visit what seems like an old friend. I mean, honestly, I watched him so much on TV growing up in the 70s at 6 o'clock, CBS. That's the way it is. That's how Walter Cronkite always ended his nightly broadcast. I mean, basically, there was no cable TV service back then. I mean, the only news that we got was basically at 6 o'clock for 30 minutes. You got what was the most important things. And I think with 24-hour cable news cycles, they tend to focus on things that Walter Cronkite never would. For example, when you talk about crimes that happen across the country, they seem like every crime committed in the country seems to be now a local crime. Everybody knows about kidnapping or murder in another community. Back in the 60s and 70s, unless it was a really horrendous event, Walter Cronkite limited his coverage to national news. When I come here to this grave, I think of the many times that I watched him, like the moon landing in 1969. Walter Cronkite was the one that everybody was watching just before Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon. And then I remember the Watergate period, Richard Nixon resignation, Gerald Ford swearing in. I taped the Gerald Ford swearing in on an audio tape, and I remember that he talked about Gerald Ford taking the oath of office on August 9th, 1974, with his hand open to a passage of the Bible. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. I always remember that. Walter Cronkite pointed that out. But let's go take a look at where he's buried. When I came driving up the lane down here behind the mausoleum, I saw these flags here, and I thought maybe somebody left them for Walter Cronkite, but it's another individual, no less deserving, World War II, John Norman Allred. And Walter Cronkite's over here, buried with his wife, and no flowers on his grave. Nobody's remembered him today. But man, what an American icon in broadcasting. He was actually the anchorman for CBS News from 19 years, from 1962 to 1981. And here he is, Walter L. Cronkite, November 4th, 1916 to July 17th, 2009. And the grave of his wife, Mary Maxwell, January 25th, 1916. She died first. She died in 2005. They were married March 30th, 1940. A simple little marker here for Walter Cronkite. He was often cited as the most trusted man in America. In 1981, Jimmy Carter awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So from 1937 to 1981, he covered many things. He covered World War II, he covered the Nuremberg Trails, Watergate, Vietnam War, the Iran hostage situation, assassinations of President Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., and that of John Lennon. A couple of months before the assassination, Cronkite got to go to Hyannisport and interview John F. Kennedy. That was a significant interview. Not long after that, the president went to Dallas and was assassinated. So whenever you think of Walter Cronkite, sometimes you'll always think about the assassination of John F. Kennedy and his coverage. And when the reports came in about a shooting, Walter Cronkite was one of the first people on the air. And if you remember the coverage, he got very emotional. He was trying to give updates, and when it finally came out that President Kennedy had been assassinated, Walter Cronkite visibly swallowed. He choked on his words. He put his glasses back on, and you could tell he was really upset because he had just interviewed John F. Kennedy. He knew that he had 2 children and a beautiful, loving wife, and horrific.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago. Vice President Lyndon Johnson has left the hospital in Dallas, but we do not know to where he has proceeded. Presumably, he will be taking the oath of office shortly and become the 36th President of the United States.
That coverage is kind of what put CBS on top of the ratings, and they were up against David Brinkley and John Chancellor for a long time. Eventually, Walter Cronkite and CBS Evening News took over.
In just 50 minutes from now, well within the hour, The moon is due to have visitors from another planet.
On July 20th, 1969, Cronkite was virtually breathless when the moon landing was occurring. He was with Wally Schirra, the astronaut, and he was rubbing his hands together with a smile and uttered, "Whew, boy," when it finally turns out that the Eagle had landed on the surface of the moon.
Oh, boy. Boy.
Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
Wally, say something. I'm speechless. Man's dream and a nation's pledge have now been fulfilled. The lunar age has begun. The date's now indelible. It's going to be remembered as long as man survives.
You'll also remember that Walter Cronkite retired. He handed that job off to Dan Rather. Dan Rather got the job.
This is but a transition, a passing of the baton. A great broadcaster and gentleman, Doug Edwards, preceded me in this job, and another, Dan Rather, will follow. And anyway, the person who sits here is but the most conspicuous member of a superb team of journalists. Writers, reporters, editors, producers, and none of that will change. And that's the way it is. Friday, March 6th, 1981. I'll be away on assignment, and Dan Rather will be sitting in here for the next few years. Good night.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Dan Rather's still living, and I always find it interesting to see. Tom Brokaw, for example, was the NBC guy about the same time that Dan Rather was on the air. Tom Brokaw has got some serious health problems, and he looks like just a fraction of the man he used to be. Of course, Dan Rather's also aged quite a bit. So when I was a kid, I liked to imitate famous people. Richard Nixon. I even imitated Walter Cronkite. I go, "This is Walter Cronkite reporting for CBS Evening News." That's the way it is. When I visit cemeteries, I tend to think that there's bodies buried intact 6 feet below the surface, especially under large markers such as the Cronkites. However, I learned that Walter and Betsy chose to be cremated and that only their ashes lie underneath the large slab. I learned some other interesting things about Walter Cronkite and his family. Walter lived on Cape Cod and was skilled at sailing. In his later years, he was a friend and confidant of President Bill Clinton and First Lady Hillary Clinton. His daughter, Kathy Cronkite, tried her hand at acting and was once cast for an episode of the Waltons TV series. She also had a role in the TV movie The Trial of Billy Jack. And tragically, his grandson, Peter Cronkite, who was a student at Colby College in Waterville, Maine, committed suicide at the age of 22 in 2015. A lot of activity here today in the cemetery. But, you know, I was thinking, why was Walter Cronkite buried here at Mount Moriah Cemetery? And I haven't researched this, but I think I figured it out. Arthur Maxwell, right here, had to be her father. He lived from 1874 to 1949. And over here is Eva Maxwell, 1872 to 1961, the parents of Mary Maxwell, the wife of Walter Cronkite. The death of his wife took a heavy emotional and physical toll on Cronkite, yet he found female companionship in Joanna Simon, the older sister of singer Carly Simon. Both found love after their spouses passed away within months of each other in 2005. I don't know who Charlene Wickland is, but imagine the distinction of being buried next to Walter Cronkite. Or this couple over here, Winifred and Lynn Craig, buried right next to Walter and his wife. So now I want to gain entry into the mausoleum up here and find the graves of, I don't know that they're famous, but you certainly know their product. In fact, the other day I was in CBS and I saw their candy on the shelf. I've bought their candy before. The Stovers, Russell Stover. So here's the giant mausoleum here at Mount Moriah Cemetery. We're going to go in to look for the graves of the Stovers, but just admire some of the statuary on top here. It's got a very Egyptian theme here in the Midwest of the United States. It's kind of cool, isn't it? That's something like you would see in Egypt, but we're in the Midwest, the heartland of the country. Definitely has a Egyptian feel to it. Let's go up these steps here and see if it's open today. Yep, it is. This place definitely has a creep factor to it, but it's pretty dark, and there's 2 levels of it. The catacombs. If you can get past the creepy vibe in here, those are pretty cool lamps. Here's the inside of the mausoleum. I mean, when I say it's dark, it is dark. Some of the areas of this are so dark you have to turn on the lights, and it's a good thing that they are equipped with lights because it's very, very dark in here. In fact, some of the crypt areas are so dark. Let me show you. So, I think I have my light on. There's a light switch right here. It allows you to see what's inside. These gates you can open up too. Yeah, it's definitely one of the creepier places I've been to. Okay, so this was a really hard one to find because I had to flip on the lights, but here's the grave of Russell Stover, the candy guy. 1888 to 1954, and his wife Clara Stover, 1882 to 1975. And there's that famous signature that's on the box of candy. Very cool.
Russell's crypt bears the Latin saying ad astra per aspera, which is also the motto of Kansas that means to the stars through difficulties. John James Ingalls coined the motto in 1861, stating, quote, "The aspiration of Kansas is to reach the unattainable. Its dream is the realization of the impossible." Russell and Clara Stover started out life together in 1911 on a large farm in Canada given to them as a wedding gift. They failed at wheat farming, so Russell entered the candy business in Minnesota and later in Chicago and Nebraska. On July 31st, 1921, Christian Nelson pitched to Russell Stover the idea of mass-producing a chocolate-covered ice cream treat called the Ice Cream Bar. 7 companies had rejected the idea because the bar easily melted. Stover went into the partnership with Nelson with an idea. He devised a formula for the chocolate shell to harden atop the ice cream. They took out the stick, making it an ice cream sandwich, and renamed the ice cream bar as the Eskimo Pie, which was patented on January 24th, 1922. Demand for Eskimo pies were so great that the company licensed the formula to about 1,500 manufacturers in exchange for a royalty of 1 penny per dozen sold. The treat was marketed under the brand of Russell Stover Company, and in April 1922, the partners had received $30,000 a week in royalties in the first year. Other companies came up with ways to make similar ice cream pies, and Stover and Nelson spent about $4,000 a day in legal fees to defend their patent, a battle which they ultimately lost. In 1923, Russell Stover sold his share of the Eskimo Pie Company for $25,000 and moved to Denver, Colorado, where he and Clara started a new company, Mrs. Stover's Bungalow Candies. Operating out of Clara's kitchen, the company made boxed chocolates. In 1925, the couple opened a candy factory in Denver and another one in Kansas City, Missouri, where they also set up headquarters in 1931. In the 1940s, the company changed its name to Russell Stover Candies. When Russell Stover died in 1954, just 5 days after his 66th birthday, the company was producing 11 million pounds of candy annually and selling its product through 40 Russell Stover shops and in about 2,000 department stores. Clara continued running the company until she sold it in 1960 for $7.5 million. The buyer was Lewis Ward, who had made the boxes the candy was contained in.
So I happen to know something about Clara Stover that not many people know. As you know, President Eisenhower had heart issues, and he was hospitalized at Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and he spent the last couple of years of his life in pretty bad health. His heart was just really bad. Clara Stover sent him a box of chocolates, wrapped it. He sent her a letter thanking her for it. He said that he couldn't wait to spoil the packaging and break into it because chocolates were his favorite. I know that because I owned the letter that Clara sent to President Eisenhower. Got it on eBay probably about 10 years ago, and I really enjoy owning that letter.
The Eisenhower letter of January 2nd, 1968 was sent to the Stover Mansion, which was literally funded by chocolate, at 5805 Mission Drive in Mission Hills, Kansas. I contacted the Eisenhower Library to inquire if Russell Stover was related to Ida Stover, Eisenhower's mother, but nobody could find a connection. The 25-room, 7-bedroom mansion is still standing. The Stovers bought the mansion in the early 1930s. Because it was in shambles and had been deserted for several years, Russell purchased it for $32,500. Clara was worried about not having enough money to remodel it, but those worries melted away with the blazing hot success of their chocolate business. They hired a decorator from Chicago, ordered chandeliers from Europe, and it took 5 years to carpet the mansion. Russell died in 1954, but Clara continued to live in the mansion until her death in 1975. Pretty cool stained glass on the front doors.
So at the grave of Walter Cronkite, I want to thank you for joining us on this episode of History Hunters. And just out of trivia for old Walter, I want to tell you this. That's the way it is.